Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Story, we ride the stories of the West campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The wind bit like a stray dog and would not let go. Nora Finch bent into it, shawl pulled tight, lashes clotted with ice until the street of Drybone Crossing turned to a blur of white and mud. The sign of the copper lantern squealed on its chain. Copper paint had flaked to raw tin. Piano notes leaked through the door, tinny and brave. She pushed inside and heat hit her like a shove. Smoke-old beer frying fat. The room smelled like bodies that had worked and then quit. Heads turned. A miner whistled low. A card dealer paused mid-shuffle. Sawdust stuck to the melt on Nora's hem. "We're not hiring," Rourke called from behind the bar. He had a heavy jaw and sleeves shiny with grease. He wiped a glass with a rag that made the glass worse. "I can scrub floors," Nora said. Her voice came out as sand. "I can mend. I only need the corner by the stove. Floors are full." Rourke looked her up and down. His eyes softened, then shut hard. "Beds upstairs are for men who pay." A few men laughed because they did not know what else to do. She stepped back into the cold. It hit her like a truth. The bell on Klein's General clinked when she eased the door open. Heat again. A potbelly stove hummed. Coffee beans lived in a barrel near the counter and filled the air with a smell that hurt. Mr. Klein peered over his ledger through tiny steel rims. "Store is closing." "The sun is still up." "Not for you." He lifted a hand toward the stove where two diggers spat tobacco into a dented bucket. No room. Nora swallowed what rose in her throat. The diggers kept their eyes on the iron stove. The bucket clanged. She tried Widow Larkin's cottage at the edge of town. The door opened on a chain. One dark eye. Then the chain slipped, and a thin woman in a man's coat studied Nora the way a hawk studies a mouse it cannot afford to eat. "I am freezing," Nora said. "I can sit in the corner. I won't be trouble." Widow Larkin shoved half a loaf and a wedge of cheese into Nora's hands. "Take it and move along. Drybone chews up mouths it cannot feed. I can work." "You look like work for someone else." The widow's gaze fell to Nora's hand. There was a pale line where a ring had lived. "Useless, that's what they'll say." The word landed like a slap. Nora stepped off the porch before the door closed. Wolves lifted their voices from the cottonwoods by Blue Elk Creek. She broke the bread with dead fingers and scraped the cheese. Both fought her teeth. The wind burned her cheeks clean and raw. The word kept ringing. Useless. Caleb Ward had said it only once, low and precise like a nail-hammered flush. The elders never needed to say it at all. The copper lantern's door banged open and spilled a square of light. Rourke came out with a broom and shouldered snow off the porch. "Still here," he grunted. She stared at the street because the street did not mind being stared at. He sighed through his nose. "Marshall Holt does not like strays. I am not getting crosswise with him." He scrubbed at a patch of ice. Then his voice dropped. "There is a roof that is not mine. 2 miles up Raven's Spine. Keep the drop to your right. A trapper up there. Gideon Pike. He is mean and worse than that. He prefers his own company." "Would he shoot me?" "He might, or he might not." Rourke looked at the bruised sky, storm thickening. "Pick which thing kills you." The door shut behind him. Laughter rolled and hit the wood. Nora finished the bread because leaving it felt like stealing. She tucked the last bite into her cheek and started for the ridge. The town fell away. The street ended where the mountain began and became a frozen scar cut with sled ruts and hoof prints. She kept the drop at her right as told. Snow crusted over sage and swallowed it whole. The wind swung hard from the west and shoved. Shadows came early and in a hurry. Blue Elk Creek talked through the ice. A silver line opened and shut with a sound like a sucked tooth. Nora used scrub pine for markers and counted them. 15, 20. The numbers went strange. Her toes left her, then her heels, then most of both feet. She knew they were still there because of the ache in her bones. Feeling had gone, then fear, then thought. What remained was a simple animal that wanted heat. She fell and caught herself with hands that burned. She crawled because crawling felt honest. The snow rose to her knees and then to her hips. In the lee of a rock, the wind fell off. It became a hum that might have been a song. The drift there was deep and quiet and shaped like an invitation. She slid into it and the cold turned soft. Her eyes shut without permission. There was no weight in her body now. She liked that. No weight at all. A boot hit her in the ribs. Not hard, hard enough. Air left her with a grunt and came back in needles. Up said a voice near her ear. It sounded like stones in a creek. She could not place the shape that went with it. A man built in blocks, fur steaming, ice braided in a beard. He swore. Not at her. At the mountain, at the hour, at what men have to do that they do not want. Then he took her by the front of her coat and hauled. She slid like a sack. Another swear sharper. The world tipped. His shoulder dug into her belly, and the cold of his coat pressed through her thin dress. She saw the sky go from white to black to white again as he stood with her over him. His hand caught her thigh to keep her from slipping. He found his footing by feel. He moved. The wind shouted in the pines. The creek talked louder. Her stomach hit the edge of his shoulder with each step, and it hurt in a clean way that meant she was not dead. Her hands dangled. She tried to hold to the fur, but her fingers did not take the command. A roof appeared from blackened snow, logs stacked tight, chinking gray with old mud. The door was thick and scarred where an axe had missed its mark long ago. He kicked it with the side of his boot, and it gave. Heat rolled out. Not the town kind. Wood heat. Dry and honest. It smelled of smoke and resin and iron. A wall of pelts breathed under the rafters. Iron teeth of a bear trap hung from a peg and clicked when the door jarred it. He slid her off his shoulder and onto a rope bed that squeaked. Her dress steamed at the hem. The fire snapped in a wide-mouthed hearth and spit orange onto stone. "Stay," he said. She tried to lift her head. Her neck said no. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He poured liquid from a blackened kettle into a wooden bowl. He set it near her hands. His hands were big and cut deep with lines. He did not look at her face. He looked at her feet wrapped in broken shoes and rags that had frozen to one piece. "Do not walk. You will lose them," he said. The words were flat and sure. He pointed with his chin at the bowl. "Eat." She lifted it and drank salt and heat. Meat floated there in thin slices and shocked her mouth back to life. The bowl clicked against her teeth. She could not keep it from doing that. He went to a stool and took up a knife and a stone. The sound of steel on grit was steady and patient. Sote, sote, sote. He tested the edge on his thumb and set the knife aside. His eyes were iron. His hair and beard were a map of the winter. He did not smile. He did not frown. "Gideon Pike," he said, without looking at her like one might say the weather. "You." "Nora Finch." He nodded once. The wind rose and shoved at the cabin. The door thumped in its frame and held. The bear trap on the peg clicked again. The sound of the stone on steel started up and filled the space between them. Her eyes closed because heat and food and the absence of wind made a room inside her where a person could sit. She did not mean to sleep. She failed at staying awake. The knife stopped singing. "Keep your feet covered," he said. "Do not touch my tools." He picked up a pelt and dropped it over her like a small hill. The fur smelled like pine snow and something wild. The storm leaned into the walls. It sounded like a giant whispering. The fire answered in crackles. She slid into dark that was not cold. Outside, something heavy crossed the roof and brushed the eaves. Claws clicked once on the frozen log. The bear trap on the peg clicked back as if it remembered. Up, he had said. He had not asked. Nora woke to heat on her face and a new kind of pain in her feet. Pins. Burning. She bit her lip and blinked at the rafters. The bear trap on the peg clicked once when the door flexed in a gust. Gideon moved in the near dark a large shape with purpose. He fed the fire with twigs, then knelt and unwrapped the greasy wool from her feet. They were angry red, not black. Blisters like pearls that had no shine. He touched the skin with a salve that smelled sharp like crushed leaves and tallow. His hands were nicked and stained, but careful. He did not look at her face. "Do not put weight on them, not today. Maybe not tomorrow." "I need the corner," she said. Her cheeks burned for another reason. The chamber pot sat like a dare in the shadows. He set it in reach, turned to the door, and stared out the lower crack while she did what she had to do. Breath steamed in the cold line of light at the sill. When he took the pot, he said nothing. The only sound was the fire and the thin rasp of the wind at the roof. Gideon moved the way work moves. He split a hair from ankle to ear in a few strokes that left no waste. He set snares and coiled lines with the neatness of a habit that could not afford slack. He drank coffee black and hot, then poured the last of it into the cookpot and filled the kettle with clean snow. He tapped the kettle with a finger. "Always have water hot. Coffee is a treat. Hot water is life." She nodded because her throat was not ready for talk. He showed her how to feed the coals. Small sticks first. Let it breathe. She tried while he watched. The first time she suffocated the ember bed and the cabin went blind with smoke. He shoved the door open and whipped the air with a blanket until the fire caught. He did not swear at her. He swore at smoke. The second time she did better. A thin ribbon of flame uncurled and licked at the kinder. Gideon grunted, which might have been praise. He set a bowl near her hand. Broth again, meat soft from long simmer. She ate with both hands as if one might withdraw permission. He put on fur and went out into the storm. The door pushed back against him. He leaned his shoulder into it and won. Snow slid off his cap and fell in a wet thud on the floorboards. Then the door shut, and the cabin went small. The wind pressed a palm against the roof and held it there. The hours had a new weight. Nora learned the room by quiet, the iron pegs above the hearth, the grooves in the table, the cuts on the door where an axe had skipped and caught. She watched steam rise from wet wool. She watched the salve sink into her skin. She kept the kettle at the edge of a boil and listened for the creak of his boots outside. He returned crusted with white. His beard had grown its own winter. He shook himself the way a dog shakes a river off. He dropped 2 hairs by the door, kicked snow from his boots, and got to work. The knife whispered. The hides folded the same way every time. He wiped the blade on his boot and set it to the stone. The rhythm filled the cabin like a metronome. At dusk he checked her feet. "Do not pull away," he said. "I will be quick." She did not mean to flinch. The memory came up anyway. A cold room, a physician with clean hands and eyes like glass, a husband who would not touch her hand while the man worked. She felt the ghost of those hands in Gideon's touch and then felt the difference. He did not prod. He did not own. He worked and stepped back as if the space between them was part of her he could not take. The storm held for days. The window was not a window. It was a plank that admitted only a seam of pale. The world beyond it turned to sound. Pines talked in low vowels. Snow hissed when it slid. Once far off, there was a crack like a tree breaking its back. By the third morning, Nora could sit without seeing stars. She fed the fire without drowning it and kept the kettle ready. Gideon nodded when he saw the steady steam. He brought in rounds cut long ago and stacked short by the stove. "Teach me," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were iron softened with ash. "Teach you what?" "To split, to carry, to do something that pays for broth." He took the smaller hatchet from the wall. A handle dark from use ahead honed clean. He led her to the lee of the cabin where he had heaped wood under a ragged tarp. The wind still pressed, but less. The snow was lower here, more crust than drift. He set a round on its end. He showed her feet, wide knees soft. He said, "It is not your arm. It is the head falling true." He raised his own axe and split a thick round with one breath. The wood gave like it had meant to all along. She took the hatchet. It felt heavier than it looked. She brought it down and hit off center. Bark flew and stung her cheek. He did not speak. She set the round upright and tried again. The blade bit an inch and stuck. She worked it loose, jaw tight. She swung. The hatchet glanced, and the handle punched her shin. Pain fired up her leg sharp and clean. She stood there with the hatchet loose in her hand, and then she threw it. It cartwheeled once and buried in a drift. "I cannot do this," she said. Gideon did not tell her otherwise. He walked to her. He stood close. She slapped his chest with both hands, soft and stupid, through the coat. "Let me be useless by myself," she said. He took her shoulders and pulled her in. It was not tender. It was not cruel. It was like he was the wall, and she was the thing trying to go through it, and he held. Her breath hit his coat and came back warm. She pushed once more, then stopped. The wind made a sound at the eave like a woman keening. He did not shush her. He did not say it is all right. He lifted one hand and put it on the back of her head and held her against the fur until the heat in her face had run out. He stepped back and picked up the hatchet and put it in her palm. "Try again," he said. She did. The blade found center. The cut was ugly and shallow, but it was cut. She did not look at him, but she heard him pick up his own axe and return to his steady work. His thwack made the air jump. Her smaller sounds scattered after it. They worked until their breath came hard and the pile of halves grew. That night she pricked her finger on a buckskin shirt she was mending. Blood welled clean and red. She put the finger in her mouth and tasted iron. Gideon watched from the stool where he was oiling a rifle. The light laid shadows in the hollows of his face. She lifted her eyes, and his met them. They stayed there longer than was polite. He set the rifle parts down one by one with care, like setting down a sleeping child. He came across the room in a few steps. He said her name as if testing it, Nora. She said his, and it shook a little, Gideon. He knelt. His thumb traced her cheek as if he had never touched a face before. He bent and kissed her. His beard scratched her skin. His mouth was hot and tasted of coffee and smoke. She let the needle fall. Her hands went to his shoulders, then curled there to keep balance. He made a sound that lived in his chest and moved into her. The kiss deepened and then stopped. He pulled back with his breath short and eyes dark in a way that did not scare her. "No," he said. Her body had gone from cold to heat so fast she felt dizzy. "What do you mean?" "You're not ready. I will not be that man." "What man?" The man who takes because he can. The man you left behind. He stood and backed away from the firelight as if it burned. He rubbed a hand over his face and said, "I can wait." He did not say how long. He turned his back and lay down on his bed of furs by the door. He did not turn away. He lay on his side facing her with his rifle in easy reach. He watched the stove until his breathing leveled. She slept without ghosts and woke with a sore shin. The next day he cleared a lower shelf and wiped it with his sleeve. "For your things," he said. She folded her one good dress and set it there. The space around it felt like a field waiting for seed. Then he left at dawn with a saw over his shoulder. The sound of teeth on wood came through the wall like a second heartbeat. He did not come in at noon. He did not come at dusk. He came at night heavy with sawdust eyes rimmed red and told her to step outside for a minute. It was cold enough to crack water. She hugged the coat around her and stood under a sky dented with stars. When he called her back, the rope bed was gone. In its place stood a pine frame. He had sanded it smooth where hands would go. He had cut a headboard and carved a simple columbine in the center. The flower was crude and kind and made something hot bloom under her ribs. She did not say thank you. She put her mouth to his cheek. Heat rose in his face. He grabbed his coat and went out and split wood by starlight until the sound filled the trees. Salt ran low first. The coffee tin made a hollow sound when she lifted the lid. Gideon wrinkled his nose, which meant nothing to a stranger, and meant much to her now. "We go down," he said. "We," she said. "We. Stay close. Keep your eyes down. Do what I say." They followed the cut he kept in the drifts. Nora wore his old trousers tied with rope and a coat that once belonged to someone smaller. The valley air hurt less, but felt no kinder. Drybone Crossing looked the way it had, and somehow worse. The copper lantern's porch had a new stain. Klein's window had more frost and more eyes. Inside the store, Nora kept her hands to herself. Gideon opened his pack and slid pelts onto the counter. The soft weight changed Mr. Klein's posture. He counted out powder lead, a sack of flour salt, in a twist coffee in a small brown bag. Nora found a wooden box of needles and 3 colors of thread. The box fit in her palm and made her throat ache. Mr. Klein took his time. He smiled without warmth at Nora's hands. "Fine notions for a mountain woman. Thread costs." Gideon said nothing. He counted back the value of the pelts with his jaw set. He slid coin and got a receipt scratched in a hard hand. Nora stood straight because slumping felt like surrender. She stepped onto the porch and tasted the clean cold. A shape filled the doorway to the alley. Marshall Avery Holt, a wool coat too tight, a tin star with a scratch, a mouth that smiled without his eyes. "You look better fed than last time," he said. He set a hand on her forearm and squeezed. Fingers pressed into skin through wool. A thumb traced the inside of her wrist like it chose her pulse. "Where are you keeping warm these days?" "Let go," she said. "Or what?" He leaned in. His breath had the sour of last night. He smelled like old coffee burned hard. "Get your hand off her," Gideon said. He stood at the edge of the porch. His hands were empty, but sat near the knife at his belt the way hands do when they know a thing by feel. His face held nothing. Holt's grin turned into a line. "We are all friends," Marshall Holt said. He raised both palms and stepped back. His eyes went to Gideon and stuck there. He saw what lived there and decided not to push. He tipped his hat to Nora without respect and turned into the street. They walked out of town at a pace that blurred everything but the road. No one tried to stop them. The ridge climbed like a promise and a threat. Gideon's silence had a new tension in it. Nora matched it with her jaw. When the cabin came into view, the snow around it was clean and unmarked. Gideon set the packs down by the door and stood still. The cold had a different sound now. He turned and lifted a heavy iron from a peg. The bear trap's jaws gaped like a mouth. "Horses," he said. She listened and then heard it. Metal on ice, a breath of steam and a snort, a rider shifting weight far down among the pines. He looked at her. His eyes were calm and bright and flat. He set the trap in the snow where a man would run when he thought he was safe. He dusted new snow over it with his glove and left no print. He brought in wood without hurry and set 2 more rounds by the door. He banked the fire low and pinched out the lamp with wet fingers. The room went to embers. The cabin breathed. Outside, hooves crunched and paused. The bear trap on the wall clicked once as if it remembered a different set of teeth. Hooves ground ice to grit. Men breathed hard through scarves. The porch steps creaked once and went still. Nora lay flat by the new bed with the Winchester tucked into the carved gap. The room held its breath. Embers ticked in the stove. The plank that made the window glowed a thin gray at the seams. Boone called a voice that wanted to sound official and landed sour. "Marshall Holt, I got paper for the woman. Come to the door and take it like a citizen. Gideon stood where he had drilled a peephole near the jamb. He put an eye to the dark and saw shapes settle against the pines. 5. Holt at the center, fat in the saddle and trying to sit light on a bad leg. 4 others with him, not deputies. Men who rented their guns. What is the charge? Gideon said. Theft. Mr. Klein swore it. Thread and needles walked out of his store. For thread, Gideon said. His voice did not rise. He sounded like water under ice. You gonna make me read the warrant to a wall, Holt said. Last chance, send her out. Send your paper to the fire, Gideon said. Silence pulled tight. The horse nearest the door snorted and stamped. A man cursed at his bit. Snow whispered as someone shifted weight. Light it, Holt said. A body moved in the dark. A match scratched. Fire crawled along a rag soaked in lamp oil and kissed a thatch of dry weeds under the eaves. The first scream broke over them before the flames had a chance. A metal snap. A howl that came from the bottom of a man and would not stop. The sound raised the hairs on Nora's arms. Trap, someone yelled. He set a trap. Hold your fire, another voice called. Jed is caught. He is caught bad. Leave him, Holt rasped. Watch the door. Keep your eyes right there. An axe hit wood. The whole wall jumped. Splinters spit into the room. Nora squeezed her eyes shut and tasted smoke that had not been lit. She set her cheek to the stock and breathed through her nose. Inside, she told herself. Inside. Shots thudded into the logs in a slow cadence. The stove sang high when a stray round kissed its side. Gideon raised his rifle and sighted on Holt's hat through the pinhole. He worked the lever. The sound was clean. He took a breath and squeezed. Holt folded with a groan and fell against his horse's neck. The animal threw its head and danced sideways. Nora saw boots under the door. A man stepped into the spill of the peep light. She tracked the space where his chest would be and waited. The axe struck again. A wedge of log jumped inward and hit Gideon in the shoulder like a thrown stone. He stumbled and bit off a shout. The axe came again lower. The door held, but the wall spit a broken rib of wood that whirled and stuck. Blood bloomed through buckskin on Gideon's right side and ran hot down his ribs. He fired again, short and mean. A man yelled that he was hit and fell hard into the snow. Someone dragged him by the collar and left a wide red. Feet scrambled. A horse slewed and nearly went down. Pull him, Holt gasped. Pull Jed too. Move, you cowards, move. No one moved toward the door. No one wanted that wood. They reeled back the way they had come. The hooves sounded wrong, hurried, and without shape. Then there was only the slow shift of a wind that had spent itself. Nora pushed up from the bed throat, raw with quiet fear. Gideon had one hand clamped over his shoulder. Blood leaked through his fingers. His face was a deep gray under the firelight. He leaned his weight against the door as if it might lean back. They will return, he said. He was not guessing. She tore strips from an old shirt and pressed into the wound. He hissed. Heat rolled off him, not from the stove, but from the body that was trying to keep itself. The smell of iron and tallow filled the room. Not like this, Nora said. Not trapped in a box. She looked at the plank over the window. She looked at the headboard with the rough columbine. She looked at the bear trap hanging on its peg, and then at the smear of blood under her hands. Get up. We are going to town. They will hang me, he said. A man is dead in a trap, and I put a hole in Holt. You will speak, she said. I will speak. They can put the whole town in the copper lantern and hear it. If we sit here, fire comes next. He swayed once, then he nodded as if a judge had already said it. He shrugged into his coat with help and tied his arm tight to his side. He took the knife because a man felt naked without it. Nora slung the Winchester and shouldered the pack because the pack did not care who carried it. The trail down was cut and hard. The creek sang under ice, a fast, thin sound under a heavy, slow one. Blue elk threw mist that crystallized on their faces and stayed there. Gideon leaned on Nora's shoulder and gave her all his weight twice when the ground slid. She bore it like a pallet of wood and said nothing. Drybone Crossing stepped into view and stared back. People gathered without meaning to. A curtain tilted in one window and paused. Della Rose stood at the copper lantern rail with a broom she did not use. Marshal Holt sat in front of his office with a blanket over his lap and a cigar stuck to his mouth. The blanket had bled through at the corner. His eyes washed hot when he saw Gideon walk into the street. "Arrest them," he shouted and tried to stand. He grabbed at his holster and winced. 2 men set their shoulders, as if a fight might begin. Tom Calder, the blacksmith, put a hand up and said, "Hold." His voice was steady and had weight. "Judge Nash is in the lantern," he said. "He came up the stage for the land suit. If there is a thing to hear, he will hear it." Nora swung the saloon door with her hip, and the room split for them. The piano lid was down. Cards lay abandoned in a fan. Judge Ellery Nash sat at a small table with a ledger and a pen that looked too nice for this place. His hair was thin and combed, and the lines at his mouth had been earned in courtrooms that smelled different. "What is this?" he said. "Marshal Holt says we are criminals," Nora said. Her voice carried because she had decided it would. She lifted the rifle away from her shoulder and set it on the floor at her feet, barrel down. Gideon took his hand from his shoulder, and blood put a small pool on the boards near his boot. "Mr. Klein," the judge said, without looking away from Gideon's face. "Did you swear a complaint?" Klein had followed the crowd and was already sorry. He wiped nervous hands on his apron. "I did," he said. She took thread. It was on the counter, and then it was not. "We paid with pelts," Gideon said. He looked at Klein the way a man looks at a thing that will never matter to him again. Holt limped in and threw his cigar into the hearth. He pointed at Gideon and found his voice. "He booby-trapped his yard and maimed Jed Flynn. He shot me. He defied a warrant." The room shifted. It had held breath and now began to breathe. Della Rose stepped forward with both hands on the broom like a staff. The judge looked at her. Della kept her eyes on Holt. "He used that badge on me when I came to town," she said. "He said a warm cell for a night if I was friendly. He said it soft with a hand on my wrist the way he is doing now." "You watch your mouth," Holt said. He pulled at his coat and found the star with his fingers as if it might tell him what to say. Widow Larkin pushed in near the door. She had an old grief in her face and a new anger. He bothered Sally. He went to her place after midnight and told her the town would be easier if she was agreeable. The judge looked at faces. He had seen liars and saints and men who were both. He saw how the room leaned. He turned to Klein again. "Mr. Klein." Klein's lips stuck together. He was not a brave man and did not pretend otherwise. He said the thread was on the counter and then it was not. He did not say more. He did not need to. Judge Nash stood. He was not tall. He did not have to be. "Marshal Holt, hand your badge to Mr. Calder. Hand your gun as well. You are removed." "You take the word of a tramp and a mountain killer over law," Holt said. He tried for contempt and hit pleading. "I take the weight of this room," the judge said. He turned to Gideon and Nora. "The charge of theft is dismissed. The killing is judged self-defense in the face of an officer who abused his office. You two will leave the lantern as free as you came in." The room let out breath in one soft sound. Tom Calder stepped to Holt and put out his hand. Holt stared at it as if it had offended him, and then took the star off his chest and dropped it. The gun followed. It hit the table and slid. Nash did not flinch. The gun stopped at his ledger as if it had run out of road. Holt pushed through the door, shouldered by men who were done with him. The street took him. The blanket dragged one corner and left a wet trail in the dusting of snow. Silence sat down in the saloon and stayed. Gideon swayed once. He set his hand on the table. The boards were not steady enough. Heat came off him like a stove door left open. Nora stepped under his arm and took the weight. His skin against her neck felt too hot too fast. He tried to speak and could not find the words. Blood darkened the bandage she had tied. He breathed through his teeth. The room tilted around him. Nora said, "I need clean water and someone to boil it." She did not ask. She said it. Rourke moved before the judge did. He grabbed the kettle from the stove and filled it from a barrel. He shoved kindling into the firebox and made heat like a man who had been waiting to be told. Gideon's knees bent without his say. He went down slow and heavy. Nora went with him and felt the iron scent rise up clean and strong. The stove clicked. The kettle began to sing. Rourke's kettle screamed. He poured the boil into a basin, and Nora took it without flinching. Clean cloths thumped onto the table. Della Rose set down a bottle of clear liquor that bit the air. Judge Nash stepped aside. The room bent around the work and held. Nora cut away the buckskin with a small knife. The cloth stuck and let go with a wet sound. The wound was a mouth. Splinters of pine lay in it like dirty teeth. Gideon set his jaw. His eyes found a knot in the ceiling and held there. He did not make a sound when she poured liquor. His hand found the table's edge and closed. "Hold him," Nora said. Tom Calder's hands were steady and kind. Rourke braced Gideon's good shoulder. Nora went hunting with a pair of tweezers she did not trust. The first long sliver came free, slick with blood. The second broke in her grip. She dug and felt Gideon's breath stop and start. She worked until the basin water turned pink and thin, then red and thick. "That is enough here," the judge said in a low voice. "Get him out of the smoke and the eyes." Nora tied a clean bandage tight. Gideon sagged. He was all weight. She got under him, and he stood because she told him to stand. The room parted. Rourke pressed a twist of salt into her palm and a tin of coffee into Gideon's pack without looking at Holt's empty chair. Della Rose set a hand on Nora's arm and squeezed once. Outside, the light was hard and small. Frost smoked at the eaves. The town watched without words as Nora and Gideon crossed the street. Mr. Klein did not come out. Widow Larkin did. She lifted her chin at Nora like a promise that someone saw. The ridge took them back. Blue Elk's voice ran under the snow. Gideon's breath rasped and hitched. He leaned and Nora took him. The sun sheared off the white and slid into the trees early. A raven rode the wind ahead of them and spoke a word that had no meaning to people. At the cabin door, Nora shouldered the bar and heaved it up. The room remembered them with a smell of ash, and old fat and pine. She set Gideon on the bed, and he sank like a rock in water. His skin had the sheen of heat. Steam rose from him even in the cold air, fire first. She built it with the care he had taught. Tinder, then small sticks, then split rounds that took clean. She filled the kettle with snow and set it on the iron. She found the jar of lye soap and the salt twist from Rourke and laid them out where her hands could reach without thought. Gideon's eyes lost their focus and went away. He spoke to the rafters in a voice that did not know her name. "Sarah," he said, and then softer boys. "Get by the creek. Hold the door if you have to." His right hand clawed at the pelt and found nothing. Nora wiped his face with a wet cloth and lifted his head to spoon water. The water ran out of his mouth and down his beard. She tried again until he swallowed once as if his throat had remembered the trick. His skin burned under her fingers. He shook and went still and shook again. The wound wept. She boiled the cloth and set it to soak. The salve smelled of bear fat and crushed pine. She cleaned what she could with the salt water and then with the liquor until his breath came in a hiss. He did not wake. At the edge of the firelight, the iron bear trap clicked in the draft as if an old jaw ached in weather. Night took the windows that were not windows. Wind laid a hand against the door. The kettle sang and sang. Nora fed him broth made thin so it would run. She sat him against her chest when his breathing went ragged and felt the heat of him soak her shirt. He tried to stand in his fever, and she wrapped arms and legs and held like a rider holds a spooked horse firm and quiet until the shaking passed. He called out again, and the names stepped off his tongue like men going into water. Jacob, Eli. The sound cut her. She put her mouth to his ear and said the boys are safe. She did not know if she lied or told the only truth that could help. His hand found her wrist and squeezed like a drowning man would hold a rope, then fell. The first night had weight. It pressed the roof lower and made the nails frost white. The fire breathed and sometimes sighed. Nora kept the kettle just at a simmer and refilled it the moment it fell quiet. "Hot water is life," she said under her breath, and it felt like a prayer to the small gods of this room. When dawn smudged the seam of the window plank, his fever climbed. It climbed as the sky lightened and then climbed more. His skin went gray and red and gray again. His lips cracked and bled, and she greased them with a finger. She stripped the bandage and found the wound angry and shining. She cleaned it again slower and spoke to him in a tone she had not used for anyone. Wake for water, sleep for healing, stay. The day had no shape that she could keep. It was a string of small tasks that mattered. Feed the fire, boil the cloth, wipe the sweat, loose the bandage and set it again. Make him swallow. She counted breaths because it kept her from counting hours. Sometimes she stood by the door with her hand on the bar and watched the snow drift climb against the logs like a tide. Then she turned and went back to the only thing that had a chance. At sunset, the fever tipped. His body trembled and went slack. She pressed a hand to his chest and could not find a rhythm that felt safe. Panic came like a knife. She put her ear to his ribs and listened. The sound was thin and soft and then not there. She pulled him up and wrapped him in her arms and spoke to the man inside the heat. "You do not leave me," she said. "You do not get to." Her voice came out low and even and taut. "You promised me windows. You promised me a garden. You pulled me out of the snow and set up. You stay." His breath touched her neck and went away and came back. Tears ran into her mouth and tasted like salt and ash. She did not pray to anyone with a name. She prayed to the stove and the logs and the iron nails that held the roof together. She prayed to the kettle and to the animal they had killed for the fat in the salve. She prayed by keeping the fire alive and by refusing to move from where his heart should be. The night did not move. It sat and watched. The walls creaked as the cold pressed and eased. Somewhere a branch let go of its snow, and the thud might as well have been a gunshot. The bear trap clicked once and was quiet. Toward morning, his skin cooled under her hands. The heat went out of him and into the room. His shaking quieted. She did not trust any of it. She kept her ear to his ribs and counted to 10 and to 20 and to 50. On 32, his breath hitched and deepened. On 40, he drew a breath that filled his chest in a way she had not heard in 2 days. His hand moved. Fingers found her hair and tangled clumsy. His eyes opened a slit, and the gray in them belonged to this cabin, and not to the place he had been walking. He saw her and the fire, and then just her. Home, he said. The word was barely air. She laughed and made a sound that was almost a sob. She put her forehead to his and felt the sweat there cool. He shut his eyes again but did not fall through. His fingers stayed in her hair. The line of his mouth softened. The kettle whispered and then went quiet as if it understood. The storm stepped back from the walls. The fire settled into a steady glow. Nora pulled the pelt higher and tucked it around his shoulders. She laid her palm flat on his chest and found a beat that was slow and heavy and true. She counted it in the dark until numbers meant nothing, and only the weight under her hand remained. Morning light came pale and thin and honest. The seam at the window plank turned from gray to white. Frost melted off the nail heads and left small, wet eyes in the wood. Gideon slept. When he woke, he looked at the ceiling for a long time, then at her, then at the stove. Fire is low, he said, and his voice belonged to him again. Spring did not ask. It broke in. Snow slid from the roof in long sheets and hit the ground with a dull thud. Blue Elk Creek roared. The air smelled of wet earth and rot and pine buds that had not opened yet. Gideon could sit up by noon and stand by night. The next morning he cursed at his legs and stood without help. His right arm shook when he tried to lift it above his chest. He gave up on lifting and started to teach with his left. Out by the woodpile, he showed her how to sight a cut and where to make the notch. Knees soft, hips square. Let the head do the work. She swung, and the axe chewed rough and true. A log split with a sound that satisfied a part of her she had forgotten. Gideon watched with a face that looked like stone until he gave a single nod. That nod moved through her like heat. He tore the plank off the window with a crowbar. The board went and light fell into the room like water. Dust danced in it. Everything looked different. The bear trap on the peg showed a dark bloom of rust and an old gouge in one jaw. Gideon stood in the square of light and squinted as if he had been underground. "This is a box," he said. It was a box. He set posts and laid a sill and made a frame for a second room. His right arm could not lift the weight, so he sawed and fitted with his left, and his body learned a new balance. Nora dragged logs. Tom Calder came one day with a mule and a coil of rope and did not ask for pay. He hauled and held and left a sack with nails and a hammerhead, then nodded once and walked back to town. The new room grew true along the south wall. Gideon cut 2 windows and set them wide. He ran a stovepipe clean and straight. He built shelves along one wall and left the lower shelves empty. Nora filled the first with a tin of salt, a paper of coffee, and a small jar of sugar that Della Rose had wrapped in cloth and sent up the ridge with a boy who could run. On a morning that began with fog and turned to sun, a mule train appeared at the edge of the trees. Tom came with it, and behind him Mr. Klein walked with his eyes on the ground. They left flour, coffee, salt, 2 blankets, a little tin of peaches. Klein set a small leather notebook and a pencil on the sill and looked at Nora as if asking permission to live. She took the book, said thank you, and saw him breathe again. She wrote at the table by the window. April 4th. Blue Elk runs high and mean. April 10th. The kitchen stands and holds light like a bowl. April 19th. A flower pushed up near the creek. Purple, looked like a throat. She made the letters small and neat. Gideon watched her write and did not say a word. When she put the pencil down, he ran his fingers along the edge of the paper as if it were a new kind of wood. She took a corner near the new door and broke earth with a spade that had no handle wrap. Soil stuck and fell in dark clods. She planted lupine and columbine because that was what grew there on its own and looked as if it had been waiting for someone to notice. Gideon stood with his arms crossed and said, "You cannot eat those." She said, "You can look at them." He said, "The deer will." The next morning a small fence of willow appeared around the patch. He said nothing. She pretended not to notice the way the willow wove in and out like a braid. His shoulder pulled tight when he slept. At dawn, she rubbed salve into the puckered skin with a touch that was sure and gentle. The scar was ugly and true. He rolled toward her and let his eyes close. His breath slowed under her hand. Late in May, a trader rode up and offered to take every pelt Gideon would bring for the next year. Good money, enough to get out of Wyoming if a man wanted to. Gideon looked at the paper without reading it, and then at Nora over the top of it. "We could go," he said. There is country west with rain that falls in the afternoon and stops by supper. There is east with streets made of brick. If you want a different sky, we can go find it. She closed her little notebook and set it on the sill. East had parlors and thin tea and words that cut like thin knives. West had more sky and other kinds of cold. She looked at Gideon standing with his scar and his steady eyes and the way the room changed when he was in it. She looked at the window and the light and the 2 chairs and the new shelves that were not empty anymore. The mountain had tried to kill her and then had let her live. It had given her a man who said water is life and then proved it. "I want this sky," she said. He did not move for a long breath. Then he set the trader's paper on the stove and watched the flame eat the edge and curl it. The trader started to speak and then did not. He tipped his hat and left with the sound of harness leather creaking. Blue Elk talked over it and made its own law. Summer came in loud. Flies hummed at noon and hummed again at dusk. Heat lifted pitch from the logs and glued it to their fingers. Sheets hung on a line and snapped. Gideon hammered iron the way a man hammers thoughts that do not sit right. He set the small forge by the creek in a ring of stones and fed it with charcoal until the metal went to orange. He brought a piece of the old bear trap and laid it on the anvil. He looked at it for a long time. The jaw had a nick where some other thing had fought it a lifetime ago. He set the iron in the coals and turned it with tongs. When it glowed, he lifted it out and hammered it thin and even. He heated and hammered and heated again until the piece moved like it had learned a new language. He twisted it into a simple knot and closed the ends and smoothed the seam with the file that had made his knives true for years. He came to her with his hands still black. He did not look at her at first. He looked at his palm and at the ring sitting there. It was iron. It was dark and honest. It caught light like water in shade. "I melted the old trap," he said, "the one by the door." Her breath left her chest and came back warm. She held out her left hand. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit as if her hand had known its shape before he forged it. The iron felt cool for a breath, then it took her heat and kept it. "You are not anyone's again," he said, and then he looked at her and tried to fix it. "I mean, you are yours. And you are mine if you want to be." She put her fingers in his beard and pulled him down to kiss him. The kiss was slow and tasted of smoke and iron and summer. He gathered her in with both arms, and the scar on his shoulder pulled, and he did not care. The door stood open, and wind ran through the new room and over the bed and out the other window. The light held the dust, and the dust held the light. Evening came. The ridge went purple and then black. The garden glowed a little. Lupine opened and stood like small flags in a country that had decided to choose them. The fence made a shadow ladder on the dirt. They ate on the step stew and bread and listened to Blue Elk talk. An owl spoke once. A far roll of thunder walked along Raven's spine. Gideon stood and pulled the new door shut. The latch set with a soft sound that told a body it was safe. He set the bar not out of fear of men, but because night is a thing kept on the other side of wood. He turned and looked at the windows and at her, and at the iron on her hand. The stove gave a small pop. The house breathed. Nora laid her palm on the sill where the late light still touched. It was warm. She looked at Gideon. He looked back with eyes that held the same room. He lifted her hand and kissed the ring and then the skin under it. The mountains kept their shape. The creek ran. The wind moved through the pines and sounded like a language she was beginning to know. The fire burned down to a low red. They lay in the bed he had made under the roof they had fixed behind the windows they had cut. The dark felt full and kind. The iron on her finger held its quiet weight. The world outside went on with its cold and its laws. Inside there was a house. Inside there was light. Inside 2 breaths found one rhythm and kept it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.